What if I told you that the voice that could change your life wasn't your own? In a small Mississippi diner where sunlight painted lazy patterns through dusty windows and ceiling fans spun stories of countless conversations, destiny was about to orchestrate an extraordinary encounter. When Morgan Freeman overheard a young boy being mercilessly mocked for his stutter, something in the legendary actor's eyes shifted. What happened next would not only transform this child's life, but reshape an entire community's understanding of courage. You see, Freeman had been harboring a secret for decades, one that would turn this chance meeting into something miraculous. Want to know the real reason he stopped that day? The answer will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about the power of finding your voice. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. What if the voice that could change your life wasn't your own? In a small Mississippi diner where sunlight painted lazy patterns through dusty windows and ceiling fans spun stories of countless conversations, destiny was about to orchestrate an extraordinary encounter between a legendary actor and a young boy who couldn't find his words. Morgan Freeman hadn't planned on stopping at May's Diner that warm Tuesday afternoon. The quaint establishment, tucked away on a quiet street in Clarksdale, Mississippi, had caught his eye only because he'd taken a wrong turn while avoiding the main highway's construction. As he stepped inside, the familiar scent of coffee and fresh-baked cornbread transported him back to his own childhood days in the Delta. The diner's regular patrons barely noticed the distinguished actor's entrance, too absorbed in their own routines to recognize the familiar face. A waitress, Mrs. Carter according to her name tag, moved efficiently between tables, her tired smile never wavering as she refilled coffee cups and jotted down orders. Morgan chose a corner booth, one that offered a clear view of the entire establishment, a habit he'd developed over years of people watching for character inspiration. It was then that he noticed the boy, small for his age, with intelligent eyes, that seemed to carry the weight of unspoken words. The child sat alone at a table near the kitchen, homework spread before him like a protective barrier. Morgan recognized the defensive posture, the way the boy's shoulders hunched slightly, as if trying to make himself invisible. He'd worn that same pose himself many years ago. The peaceful atmosphere shattered when three boys burst through the diner's entrance, the bell above the door jangling discordantly. Their leader, a tall youth with a swagger that barely masked, his own insecurities zeroed in on the solitary boy like a heat-seeking missile. Morgan watched as the seated child's face drained of color, his hands beginning to tremble even before the first word was spoken. "Hey, Ethan," the tall boy, Jake Turner, called out, his mockery drawing snickers from his companions. "Still practicing your alphabet?" The cruel imitation of Ethan's stutter echoed across the diner, causing several patrons to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Mrs. Carter, emerging from the kitchen with a loaded tray, froze momentarily, her expression a complex mixture of anger and helplessness. Morgan observed as Ethan attempted to respond, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The words seemed trapped, fighting against an invisible barrier that held them hostage. The actor's hand tightened around his coffee cup, memories of his own childhood struggles with speaking flooding back. He'd overcome his difficulties through determination and the help of a caring mentor, something this young boy clearly needed. Jake Turner's taunting continued, each barb carefully crafted to inflict maximum embarrassment. Yet something in the bully's eyes caught Morgan's attention, a flicker of uncertainty, perhaps even shame, quickly masked by bravado. The actor had seen that look countless times on stage and screen, the face of someone playing a role they didn't fully believe in. Mrs. Carter moved to intervene, but Morgan was already rising from his booth. His presence, when finally noticed, caused a ripple of recognition through the diner. Jake's smirk faltered as the imposing figure approached their table, his confident swagger diminishing with each step Morgan took. The actor's deep, commanding voice, honed through decades of performance, filled the suddenly silent space. What happened next would change not just Ethan's life, but the lives of everyone present in May's Diner that afternoon. Sometimes the most powerful stories begin in the quietest corners with the smallest acts of kindness, and sometimes the voice you need to find your own comes from the most unexpected source. The question wasn't whether Ethan could overcome his stutter. It was whether those around him would recognize the strength it took to face each day, fighting battles they couldn't see. As Morgan prepared to speak, he knew this moment would either break the boy's spirit or become the first chapter in a story of transformation. Which would it be? The gentle scrape of Morgan Freeman's shoes against the diner's worn linoleum floor drew every eye in the establishment, creating a ripple of whispers that spread like wildfire. The legendary actor's presence commanded attention, yet his focus remained solely on the young boy hunched over his chocolate milkshake, desperately trying to disappear into the vinyl booth. Ethan Carter's fingers trembled around his glass, aware of the approaching footsteps but too afraid to look up. The remnants of Jake Turner's cruel laughter still echoed in his ears, mixing with the familiar ache of embarrassment that accompanied each stuttered attempt to order his drink. Would this famous stranger merely add another layer to his humiliation? Morgan paused at Ethan's table, his warm voice cutting through the tension like a gentle breeze. "Mind if I join you, young man?" The question hung in the air, offering Ethan something he rarely experienced: a choice. The boy's eyes darted toward his mother, Mrs. Carter, who stood frozen behind the counter, coffee pot suspended mid-pour as she watched the scene unfold. From his position near the jukebox, Jake Turner's usual swagger faltered. The bully's confident demeanor cracked slightly as he witnessed Morgan Freeman, the voice of countless documentaries and the face of numerous Oscar-worthy performances, choose to sit with his favorite target. What could someone like Morgan Freeman possibly see in stuttering Ethan Carter? Mrs. Carter's maternal instincts warred with her curiosity as she observed the interaction. How many times had she wished for someone to reach out to her son, to show him that his worth extended beyond his struggle with words? Her hands clutched her apron, hope and anxiety battling in her chest as Morgan settled into the booth across from Ethan. Coach Daniels, seated quietly in a corner booth reviewing his student files, looked up with keen interest. His experienced eye recognized the potential of this moment. How often did divine intervention arrive in the form of a Hollywood legend? The speech coach's fingers drummed thoughtfully against his coffee cup, years of experience telling him that sometimes the most profound breakthroughs came from unexpected sources. Morgan's presence created an invisible shield around their booth, his natural authority deterring any potential interruptions. "That milkshake looks mighty good," he commented, his distinctive voice carrying just enough to be heard by nearby tables. "Though I've always been partial to strawberry myself. What made you choose chocolate?" The simple question presented Ethan with a familiar challenge. His thoughts raced ahead of his ability to speak, creating that dreaded bottleneck of words that always seemed to trap him. But something in Morgan's patient gaze suggested he had all the time in the world to wait for an answer. Jake shifted uncomfortably near the jukebox, his father's critical voice echoing in his head. How many times had he been told that weakness deserved ridicule? Yet here was Morgan Freeman, whose mere presence commanded more respect than all of Jake's attempted intimidation, choosing to spend time with the very kid Jake had deemed unworthy. Mrs. Carter found herself drawn closer to their booth, ostensibly wiping nearby tables but actually straining to hear their conversation. Her son's struggles had become her own, each stuttered word a sharp pain in her heart. Could this unexpected encounter be the catalyst for change she'd been praying for? The diner's usual ambient noise faded to a hushed murmur as other patrons tried to eavesdrop without appearing obvious. What would happen next? How would Ethan respond to this unprecedented attention? And why had Morgan Freeman, of all people, chosen to intervene in this small-town drama? Coach Daniels leaned forward slightly. His professional interest piqued. He'd seen countless methods for helping children overcome speech difficulties, but sometimes the most effective approach was simply having someone believe in them. Could Morgan Freeman's interest provide the confidence boost that Ethan so desperately needed? The moment balanced on a knife's edge. Would Ethan find his voice, or would his silence persist? The answer to that question would set in motion a chain of events that would transform not only Ethan's life, but the lives of everyone in that diner. What words would finally break through the barrier of Ethan's stuttering, and how would they change the dynamics of this small Mississippi town forever? Morgan Freeman settled into the worn vinyl booth across from Ethan Carter, his presence commanding, yet gentle. The young boy's eyes widened, his fingers nervously tracing the condensation on his untouched glass of chocolate milk. Who would have thought that the voice that narrated countless documentaries and brought gravitas to numerous films once struggled to emerge at all? You know, Ethan, people often assume I was born with this voice. Morgan began, his rich timbre softening to match the intimate nature of their conversation. But there was a time when I couldn't string two words together without freezing up completely. The revelation caught Ethan off guard, his usual stutter momentarily forgotten in his surprise. Mrs. Carter, watching from behind the counter while refilling coffee cups, found herself drawn into their conversation, though she maintained a respectful distance. Her son's struggles had become her own, each painful silence in school presentations and phone calls weighing heavily on her heart. Could this unexpected encounter be the breakthrough her boy needed? Morgan continued, sharing how as a young actor, in New York he would sometimes become so paralyzed with anxiety that he'd walk off stage during rehearsals. Fear has a way of convincing us we're less than we are, he explained, noting how Ethan's shoulders gradually relaxed as he listened. But here's something most people don't know. I started taking acting classes not to become famous, but to find my voice. The story resonated with Jake Turner, who had paused his usual after-school harassment routine to eavesdrop from a nearby booth. His father's critical voice echoed in his head, always demanding perfection, always pointing out flaws. How many times had he turned his own insecurities into weapons against others? What made it be better? Ethan managed to ask, his curiosity temporarily overwhelming his self-consciousness. Morgan's eyes crinkled with understanding, recognizing the courage it took for the boy to speak up. I met someone like Coach Daniels, Morgan revealed, watching recognition flash across Ethan's face. Yes, I know about your sessions with him. He's an old friend, and when your mother reached out for help, I knew exactly who to recommend. The connection surprised Ethan, who had assumed Coach Daniels' appearance in his life was simply a stroke of luck. The conversation shifted to techniques Morgan had learned, exercises that seemed silly at first, but gradually built confidence. He demonstrated a breathing exercise, encouraging Ethan to try it with him. Mrs. Carter, still watching, noticed how her son's breathing naturally fell into rhythm with Morgan's, his usual tension beginning to dissolve. The hardest part wasn't learning to speak, Morgan confided, leaning forward slightly. It was learning to believe I had something worth saying. This truth hung in the air, resonating not just with Ethan but with Jake, who found himself questioning his own behavioral patterns. Coach Daniels had always told Ethan that everyone has their own journey to finding their voice, but hearing it from Morgan Freeman gave the concept new weight. The actor's vulnerability in sharing his story created a bridge between his legendary status and Ethan's daily struggles. You see, Ethan, our challenges don't define us, they refine us, Morgan continued, his words carrying the weight of lived experience. Every time you push through a difficult moment, you're not just practicing speech, you're building character. The diner had grown quieter, other patrons unconsciously leaning in to catch fragments of their conversation. Mrs. Carter found herself blinking back tears, watching her son engage with increasing confidence. Even Jake Turner, the self-appointed tormentor, sat transfixed, his half-eaten burger forgotten. Morgan shared how he had developed a technique of humming before difficult scenes, explaining how it helped ground his voice and calm his nerves. Would you like to try it? He asked Ethan, who nodded eagerly. Together they practiced the technique, drawing curious glances from other diners. What began as a chance encounter was transforming into something more significant, a passing of wisdom from one generation to another, a reminder that everyone's story contains chapters of struggle and triumph. But as Morgan continued sharing his journey, a new question emerged. How would Ethan apply these lessons in his own life, especially with Jake Turner watching from the shadows? Word traveled fast in small towns, and the sight of Morgan Freeman mentoring a local boy spread like wildfire through the community. At the local diner where Mrs. Carter worked, customers whispered about the unlikely pair spotted at the park bench, their conversations a mixture of curiosity and admiration. Some questioned why a Hollywood legend would take interest in a stuttering 12-year-old, while others saw it as a testament to the actor's well-known compassion. For Ethan, the attention brought unexpected changes. His classmates, who once avoided eye contact in the hallways, now sought his company during lunch breaks. Their questions about Morgan came in rapid succession, but Ethan found himself handling the attention with newfound composure. The very act of speaking about his mentor helped him practice the techniques Morgan and Coach Daniels had taught him. Jake Turner's transformation proved most surprising. During morning basketball practice, he overheard his father discussing Morgan Freeman with other parents, their voices carrying across the court. The conversation shifted from Morgan's presence in town to the importance of addressing bullying, causing Jake to miss several shots. His father's critical gaze burned into him, but for the first time Jake recognized a reflection of his own behavior in his father's disapproval. At school, the dynamic shifted subtly but significantly. Teachers noticed Jake's decreased aggression, particularly toward Ethan. During English class, when Ethan volunteered to read aloud, Jake remained silent instead of making his usual mocking gestures. The other students followed his lead, creating an atmosphere of unexpected support. Mrs. Carter witnessed the changes in her son with a mixture of joy and disbelief. Regular customers at the diner, who had watched Ethan grow up, shared stories of their own children overcoming challenges. These conversations often led to tears being quickly wiped away as she refilled coffee cups, her heart swelling with gratitude for Morgan's intervention. Coach Daniels observed the ripple effect during his sessions with Ethan. The boy's progress accelerated as his confidence grew, fueled by the positive changes in his social environment. During one particular session, Ethan managed to deliver a complete paragraph without stuttering, prompting Coach Daniels to share the achievement with Morgan through a quick text message. The impact extended beyond Ethan's immediate circle. Parents began discussing the importance of addressing speech impediments early, leading to increased enrollment in Coach Daniels' speech therapy programs. The local library initiated a weekly reading circle where children with various speaking difficulties could practice in a supportive environment. Jake's journey continued to evolve as he grappled with his past behavior. During lunch period, he approached Ethan's table, ignoring the surprised looks from his usual group of friends. The cafeteria hushed as Jake asked if he could join them, his voice carrying an unfamiliar note of humility. Ethan's response, though slightly stuttered, came with a confident nod. Morgan's influence manifested in unexpected ways throughout the community. The local theater group, inspired by the story, began planning a production addressing bullying and personal growth. They approached Ethan about participating, not as an actor, but as a consultant sharing his experiences. Mrs. Carter noticed subtle changes in her interactions with customers. Those who had previously shown impatience when Ethan struggled to order now demonstrated remarkable understanding. The diner became a hub of conversations about personal growth and the impact one person could have on an entire community. The school principal, recognizing the positive changes, implemented a peer support program. Jake, in an ironic twist, became one of its first volunteers. His first-hand experience with transformation made him uniquely qualified to help others recognize and change harmful behaviors. As autumn progressed, the story of Morgan Freeman's mentorship became woven into the fabric of the town's identity. Local newspapers ran features on speech therapy success stories, while the school board discussed implementing comprehensive anti-bullying programs. The ripple effect touched lives in ways no one could have predicted, proving that sometimes the most significant changes start with a simple conversation on a park bench. What began as one actor's decision to help a struggling boy had evolved into a community-wide movement of understanding and support. But as the excitement of Morgan's presence settled into routine, would these changes prove lasting? And how would Ethan handle his next major challenge, the upcoming school speech competition that Coach Daniels had quietly entered him in? Morgan Freeman sat in his temporary apartment, the evening sun casting long shadows across the worn leather armchair, where he contemplated his next move. The encounter with Ethan Carter had stirred something deep within him, memories of his own struggles with speaking that few knew about. How many people realize that the man with the most recognizable voice in Hollywood once battled to find his own? With practiced discretion, Morgan reached for his phone and dialed a number he'd kept for years. Sarah Daniels, it's Morgan Freeman. I believe I've found someone who needs your expertise. The conversation flowed naturally as Morgan detailed Ethan's situation, his voice carrying the weight of personal investment. Coach Daniels listened intently, occasionally asking pointed questions about Ethan's specific speech patterns and emotional state. The boy reminds me of myself at that age, Morgan explained, his deep voice softening. There's something in his eyes, Sarah. The same determination I once had, just waiting for the right opportunity to emerge. The connection between Morgan and Coach Daniels ran deeper than mere professional acquaintance, dating back to when she had helped his grandson overcome similar challenges years ago. As they discussed logistics, Morgan's thoughts drifted to Mrs. Carter, imagining her countless sleepless nights worrying about her son's future. How many parent-teacher conferences had she attended, fighting back tears as educators suggested waiting it out, or he'll grow out of it. The actor's jaw tightened, remembering similar dismissive attitudes from his own past. Coach Daniels's voice brought him back to the present. We'll need to approach this carefully, Morgan. The boy's confidence is fragile, and timing is crucial. She outlined her methodology, explaining how she would integrate her techniques with Ethan's daily routine without drawing unwanted attention. Morgan nodded, though she couldn't see him, appreciating her understanding of the delicate nature of the situation. The conversation shifted to Jake Turner, the bully whose own story had begun to unfold. Sometimes the ones who hurt others are carrying the heaviest burdens, Coach Daniels observed. Morgan shared his observations about Jake's relationship with his father, the pressure cooker of expectations that had turned a young boy into a tormentor. Could helping Ethan inadvertently create a path for Jake's redemption as well? As they finalized the details, Morgan felt a familiar surge of purpose. This wasn't just about helping one boy overcome his stutter. It was about breaking cycles of pain and isolation that often went unnoticed in small towns like this. How many other Ethans and Jakes were out there, waiting for someone to see past their struggles to their potential? The plan took shape. Coach Daniels would arrive under the guise of a general speech and drama consultant for the school, allowing her to work with Ethan without singling him out. Morgan would maintain his distance publicly while ensuring the financial aspects remained handled discreetly. Who would suspect that a chance encounter at a small-town diner would lead to such an elaborate support system? Before ending the call, Coach Daniels paused. Morgan, what made you decide to get involved? You could have just passed through town like any other visitor. The question hung in the air as Morgan considered his response, memories of his own journey flooding back. What drives anyone to reach back and lift another? Perhaps it's the recognition of our past selves in those who struggle today. Because, sometimes, Sarah, the voice someone needs to hear isn't their own. At least not yet. Morgan's response carried the weight of personal experience and the hope of transformation. As he ended the call, his gaze fell on a worn photograph on his desk, a young Morgan Freeman standing on stage, mouth open in mid-speech, eyes bright with newfound confidence. The pieces were in place. Now came the delicate task of orchestrating help without overwhelming Ethan, or alerting the town to the full scope of their intervention. Would this behind-the-scenes maneuvering provide the foundation Ethan needed to find his voice? Only time would tell, but Morgan Freeman had learned long ago that sometimes the most powerful scenes in life's drama unfold far from the spotlight. The gentle clink of coffee cups and the familiar hum of conversation filled the small diner where Mrs. Carter had spent the last 8 years serving customers. Yet today, something felt different. Her eyes kept drifting to table 7, where just days ago, Morgan Freeman had turned an ordinary afternoon into an extraordinary moment for her son, Ethan. Working double shifts had become second nature to Mrs. Carter since becoming a single mother, but the weight of Ethan's struggles had always been heavier than any loaded serving tray. How many nights had she laid awake, listening to her son practicing simple phrases in his room, his determination, punctuated by frustrated sighs. The memory of his first day of school still haunted her, the excitement in his eyes dimming with each attempted introduction. each stutter met with poorly concealed snickers from his classmates. But something had shifted since Morgan Freeman's unexpected intervention. Mrs. Carter noticed it first in the way Ethan held himself at breakfast, his shoulders slightly straighter, his eyes meeting hers more often. The change was subtle, like the first rays of sun breaking through storm clouds, but it was undeniably there. Could a single conversation with Morgan Freeman have planted such a powerful seed of confidence? The transformation manifested in small ways that only a mother's keen eye could detect. Ethan had started leaving his bedroom door open while practicing his speech exercises, no longer hiding his efforts behind closed doors. He'd even begun humming while doing his homework, a sound Mrs. Carter hadn't heard since he was much younger, before the bullying started. Jake Turner's mother had stopped by the diner yesterday, ordering her usual black coffee with 2 sugars. The conversation that followed left Mrs. Carter stunned. Apparently, Jake had asked his parents about speech therapy, showing an interest in understanding why some people struggled with speaking. Was this the same Jake who had once made Ethan's school days unbearable? During her afternoon break, Mrs. Carter found herself remembering the way Morgan had spoken to Ethan, not with pity or impatience, but with a genuine understanding that seemed to reach beyond mere kindness. What secrets lay in Morgan's past that allowed him to connect so deeply with her son's struggles? The question lingered as she refilled coffee cups and took orders, her mind wandering to the possibility of a future where Ethan's voice would ring, clear and confident. The diner's bell chimed, drawing Mrs. Carter's attention to an unfamiliar face, a well-dressed man carrying a leather briefcase. He settled into a booth, ordered a coffee, and pulled out what appeared to be student progress reports. Something about his professional demeanor and gentle way of speaking to the staff sparked her curiosity. Could this be the speech coach Morgan had mentioned? As she approached his table with the coffee pot, Mrs. Carter noticed a business card peeking out from his briefcase. Coach Daniels, speech pathologist. Her heart skipped a beat. The pieces were falling into place, creating a picture of hope she hadn't dared to imagine before. Had Morgan Freeman, in his brief encounter with Ethan, set in motion a chain of events that could change everything? The afternoon light streamed through the diner's windows, casting long shadows across the checkered floor. Mrs. Carter watched Coach Daniels sip his coffee, unaware of his connection to her son's story. How many other lives had he touched with his expertise? How many other children had found their voice under his guidance? A text message buzzed in her pocket. Ethan, asking if he could stay after school for a new activity. The simple request, sent without his usual apologetic prefaces, brought tears to her eyes. Her son was taking steps forward, however small they might seem to others. In the quiet moment between serving tables, Mrs. Carter allowed herself to imagine Ethan's future, not as the boy who stuttered, but as the young man who found his voice. The diner's routine continued around her, but Mrs. Carter's world had shifted, on its axis. Something was happening. Something set in motion by a chance encounter with a legendary actor who saw beyond her son's struggles to the strength within. What other changes would tomorrow bring? How would Ethan's story unfold with these new characters entering his life? The familiar chime of the diner's bell rang through the morning air as Morgan Freeman's distinctive figure stepped through the doorway. His presence, as always, commanded attention without seeking it, and several patrons glanced up from their coffee cups. But Morgan's eyes were fixed on one particular booth where young Ethan Carter sat fidgeting with a paper napkin, his mother hovering nearby with a pot of coffee. Mrs. Carter had been surprised when Morgan called the diner asking to meet with Ethan again. The legendary actor's interest in her son's well-being both intrigued and mystified her. What could someone of his stature possibly see in her struggling 12-year-old? "Good morning, young man," Morgan's rich baritone carried across the diner as he approached their booth. The warmth in his voice immediately put Ethan at ease, though his fingers still twisted the napkin nervously. "Morning, Mr. Freeman," Ethan managed, his stutter less pronounced than during their first encounter. Morgan settled into the booth across from Ethan, declining Mrs. Carter's offer of coffee with a gentle wave. Instead, he pulled out a worn leather notebook from his jacket pocket and placed it on the table between them. The mysterious object instantly captured Ethan's attention. his eyes fixed on its weathered surface. "Do you know what this is, Ethan?" Morgan asked, his fingers resting lightly on the notebook's cover. When Ethan shook his head, Morgan continued, "This was my companion during some of the hardest years of my life, years when I, too, struggled to find my voice." The revelation caught both Ethan and his mother off guard. Mrs. Carter, who had been pretending to wipe down a nearby table, stopped mid-motion. How could Morgan Freeman, with his commanding presence and iconic voice, have ever struggled to speak? See, Ethan, everyone faces their own battles. Mine wasn't stuttering, but it was fear. Fear of judgment, fear of failure, fear of not being good enough. Morgan's words resonated through the quiet diner, carrying weight beyond their simple meaning. This notebook contains exercises, thoughts, and small victories that helped me overcome those fears. Ethan leaned forward, his stutter momentarily forgotten as curiosity overtook anxiety. "Well, what kind of exercises?" he asked, genuine interest replacing his usual hesitation. Morgan smiled, opening the notebook to reveal pages filled with neat handwriting, breathing techniques, and what appeared to be acting exercises. "These are tools, Ethan. Tools that helped me build confidence, find my rhythm, and eventually become the person you see today. But more importantly, I want to introduce you to someone who can help you develop your own tools." At that moment, the diner's bell chimed again, and Coach Daniels walked in, his presence both professional and approachable. Morgan had carefully orchestrated this meeting, knowing that Ethan needed more than just inspiration. He needed practical guidance and consistent support. "Ethan, this is Coach Daniels. He's an old friend who specializes in helping young people find their voice," Morgan explained, watching as Ethan's eyes darted between the two men. "He's not just any speech coach. He's someone who understands that every person's journey is unique." Coach Daniels pulled up a chair, his warm smile matching Morgan's as he extended his hand to Ethan. The boy hesitated for a moment before accepting the handshake, his mother watching the interaction with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "Your friend Morgan here tells me you have quite a story to tell," Coach Daniels said, his voice carrying the perfect balance of authority and kindness. "Would you like to learn how to tell it your way, at your own pace?" The question hung in the air, loaded with possibility. Morgan's notebook lay open between them, a bridge between past struggles and future potential. Would Ethan take this step toward changing his story? And how would this new alliance between Morgan Freeman, Coach Daniels, and a 12-year-old boy with a stutter reshape not just Ethan's future, but the dynamics of his entire world, including his relationship with his former tormentor, Jake Turner? Morgan Freeman sat across from Ethan in their now familiar booth at the diner, his deep voice carrying the weight of experience as he stirred his coffee thoughtfully. The morning crowd had thinned, leaving behind the gentle clinking of dishes and the soft murmur of distant conversations. Through the window, Ethan could see his mother attending to other customers, occasionally glancing their way with a mixture of curiosity and hope. "You know, Ethan, everyone has a mountain to climb," Morgan began, his eyes twinkling with wisdom. "Mine wasn't stuttering, but there was a time when I couldn't find my voice either. Not in the way you might think, but in believing I had something worth saying." The legendary actor leaned forward, his presence both commanding and gentle. "What if I told you there's someone who could help you find your voice?" Ethan's fingers nervously traced the condensation on his glass of chocolate milk. The prospect of help brought both excitement and fear. Would this be like the other specialists who had tried and failed? But something about Morgan's confidence made him want to believe. "His name is Coach Daniels," Morgan continued, pulling out a business card with elegant lettering. "He's not just any speech coach. He's someone who understands that finding your voice isn't just about words, it's about finding yourself." The card seemed to hold a promise as it lay between them on the table. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Mrs. Carter approached during her break, wiping her hands on her apron as she joined them. Morgan shared his proposal, explaining how Coach Daniels had helped countless children overcome similar challenges. "I've known him for years," Morgan assured them. "He has a gift for seeing past the stutter to the story waiting to be told." The conversation shifted as Jake Turner entered the diner with his father, their presence causing Ethan to instinctively shrink in his seat. Morgan noticed the reaction but didn't draw attention to it. Instead, he used the moment to illustrate his point. You see that tension you're feeling right now, Ethan? That's not just about your speech, it's about power. Coach Daniels can help you find the power in your voice. Mrs. Carter's eyes filled with cautious hope as she listened to Morgan's words. The financial concerns were evident in the worried crease of her brow, but before she could voice them, Morgan raised his hand. Consider this my investment in a future storyteller, he said with a warm smile. Sometimes the universe puts us in the right place at the right time to help someone else's story unfold. The proposal wasn't just about speech therapy, it was about transformation. Morgan explained how Coach Daniels worked. Through a combination of traditional techniques and innovative approaches that incorporated storytelling, drama, and confidence-building exercises. He doesn't just teach you to speak, Morgan explained. He teaches you to command attention, to own your space, to make your words matter. Ethan's eyes widened as Morgan shared stories of other students who had worked with Coach Daniels. There was the girl who went from barely speaking to winning debate competitions, the boy who now performed in school plays, and countless others who had discovered their voices in unexpected ways. But here's the thing, Ethan, Morgan said, his voice taking on a serious tone. This isn't going to be easy. Coach Daniels will challenge you. He'll push you outside your comfort zone. The question is, are you ready to push back against what's holding you down? The challenge hung in the air as Ethan contemplated the opportunity before him. Through the window, he caught sight of Jake and his father leaving the diner, reminding him of all the times he'd wanted to stand up for himself but couldn't find the words. What would it feel like to speak without fear, to tell his stories without stumbling, to face Jake Turner with confidence instead of dread? Morgan watched the emotions play across Ethan's face, recognizing the internal struggle. You don't have to answer right now, he said gently. But remember this, every great story has a moment where the hero must choose to take the first step. This could be yours. Mrs. Carter placed a supportive hand on Ethan's shoulder, her touch conveying both protection and encouragement. The decision would ultimately be his, but the path before him now held possibilities that hadn't existed before Morgan Freeman walked into their lives. The question wasn't just about working with Coach Daniels. It was about choosing to become the protagonist in his own story. The morning sun filtered through the Venetian blinds of Coach Daniels' office as Ethan Carter shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The walls, adorned with various certificates and motivational posters, seemed to close in around him as he waited for his first official session to begin. His mother's encouraging smile from the waiting room still lingered in his mind, but it did little to calm his racing heart. Coach Daniels entered with a warm presence that immediately filled the room, carrying a worn leather notebook and a peculiar collection of objects that piqued Ethan's curiosity. Mr. Freeman said you could help me, Ethan managed, his words catching in his throat like they always did when meeting someone new. Morgan's a good friend and he rarely steers me wrong, Coach Daniels replied, settling into his chair with the ease of someone who had done this countless times before. But before we dive in, I'd like to hear your story, Ethan. Not what others have told you about yourself, but your story, in your own time, in your own words. The simple invitation opened a floodgate of emotions Ethan hadn't expected. He began sharing fragments of his experiences, the classroom presentations that felt like torture, Jake Turner's taunts that echoed in his mind, and the way his mother's face crumpled with worry when she thought he wasn't looking. Through it all, Coach Daniels listened without interruption, his expression neither pitying nor judgmental. Meanwhile, across town, Morgan Freeman sat in his temporary apartment, phone in hand, speaking with Mrs. Carter. The first day is always the hardest, he assured her, his voice carrying the weight of personal experience. But Coach Daniels has a way of turning mountains into molehills. Back in the office, Coach Daniels introduced Ethan to what he called the toolbox, a collection of techniques and exercises that seemed deceptively simple at first glance. Speech isn't just about words, he explained, placing a small mirror in front of Ethan. It's about understanding the instrument that creates them. The exercises started basic, breathing patterns, tongue twisters, and rhythm work. Each attempt brought its own frustrations, but Coach Daniels maintained an unwavering patience. "Remember what Morgan told you about his early days in theater?" he asked, noting Ethan's growing frustration. Even the greatest actors started somewhere. As the session progressed, an unexpected visitor arrived at the office. Jake Turner, scheduled for his own appointment with a different counselor. Through the partially open door, he caught glimpses of Ethan working with Coach Daniels. Something about seeing his former target so dedicated to improvement stirred an unfamiliar feeling in Jake's chest. Was it respect? The hour flew by faster than Ethan expected, and soon, Coach Daniels was wrapping up their first session. "Speech therapy isn't about quick fixes," he explained, handing Ethan a personalized practice schedule. "It's about building a foundation, brick by brick. Are you ready for that commitment?" Mrs. Carter noticed a subtle change in her son during the drive home, a straightness in his posture that hadn't been there before. While Ethan remained quiet, his silence felt different, contemplative rather than fearful. At a red light, she caught him practicing one of the breathing exercises in the passenger seat. That evening, Morgan received a text from Coach Daniels. "The boy has potential. Reminds me of another stubborn student I once knew." Morgan smiled, remembering his own journey decades ago. He typed back a simple response. "Sometimes the hardest steps lead to the most important destinations." As Ethan lay in bed that night, he replayed Coach Daniels' words in his head. The exercises felt strange, even silly at times, but something about them sparked a tiny flame of hope. He reached for the practice schedule on his nightstand, running his fingers over the carefully written instructions. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for the first time in years, Ethan felt equipped to face them. The question wasn't whether he could overcome his stutter anymore. It was how many small victories he would collect along the way. And somewhere, in the city, Morgan Freeman smiled, knowing that Ethan's journey had finally begun in earnest. The autumn breeze rustled through the leaves as Ethan Carter made his way across the school courtyard, clutching his speech exercises from Coach Daniels. 2 weeks into his training, the familiar weight of anxiety still pressed against his chest, but something had shifted. The techniques Coach Daniels taught him were beginning to take root, like tiny seeds of confidence waiting to sprout. A shadow fell across Ethan's path, and his heart skipped a beat when he recognized Jake Turner's imposing figure. Instinctively, Ethan's fingers tightened around his notebook, preparing for the usual torrent of mockery. But Jake's usual swagger was absent, replaced by an unfamiliar hesitation. "Hey, Carter," Jake said, his voice lacking its characteristic edge. "Got a minute?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken history. Ethan found himself searching Jake's face for signs of deception, remembering Morgan Freeman's words about looking beyond surface appearances. What could have prompted this unusual approach from his longtime tormentor? Jake shifted uncomfortably, glancing around to ensure they were alone. "I saw you with that actor guy the other day, Morgan Freeman. My dad wouldn't shut up about it at dinner. Said he's one of the greatest actors ever." He paused, struggling with his next words. "I also heard you started working with Coach Daniels." Ethan nodded, surprised by Jake's knowledge of his private sessions. The mention of Coach Daniels sparked a memory of their last session, where they'd discussed the importance of facing fears head on. Was this one of those moments? "My dad," Jake continued, his voice dropping lower. "He used to make me take piano lessons. I was terrible at it, but he wouldn't let me quit. Said Turners don't give up." A bitter laugh escaped him. "I ended up breaking my own finger during baseball practice just to get out of it." The confession stunned Ethan. Jake Turner, the seemingly confident, untouchable bully, had deliberately injured himself to escape his father's expectations? The revelation created a crack in the intimidating facade Ethan had built around Jake, in his mind. I didn't know," Ethan managed, the words coming easier than expected. Jake leaned against the courtyard wall, his usual bravado completely absent. "Nobody knows. That's the point, isn't it? We all have stuff we're trying to hide. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture Ethan had never seen before. Listen, about all the stuff I said before, about your stutter. The memory of countless taunts and humiliations flickered through Ethan's mind, but something in Jake's demeanor held him in place. Was this the same person who had made his school life a living nightmare for so long? My dad's always writing me about being perfect. Every grade, every game, every single thing I do. Nothing's ever good enough. Jake's words tumbled out, as if a dam had broken. When I saw you struggling with your speech, it was like, I don't know, an easy target. Someone else to make feel as bad as I did. The honesty in Jake's voice struck a chord with Ethan. He remembered Morgan's words about how people often lash out because of their own pain. Could this be what Morgan meant? But seeing you working with Freeman and Coach Daniels, actually trying to get better instead of just giving up. Jake straightened up, meeting Ethan's eyes directly. That takes guts, man. Real guts. The compliment, coming from Jake Turner of all people, sent a warmth through Ethan's chest. It was like discovering an ally in the most unexpected place, like finding a friendly face in a crowd of strangers. Morgan says everyone's fighting their own battles, Ethan offered, surprising himself with his willingness to share. Jake nodded slowly, a look of understanding crossing his face. Yeah, I guess he's right. He pushed himself off the wall, taking a step toward Ethan. Listen, I know I can't take back all the stuff I said before, but maybe we could start over? The question hung between them, weighted with possibility. Could this moment mark the beginning of a different kind of relationship between them? What would Morgan say about second chances and the courage it takes to admit mistakes? As Ethan considered Jake's outstretched hand, he realized that sometimes the biggest victories come not from conquering external obstacles, but from finding understanding in the most unexpected places. Could this former bully become an ally in his journey toward confidence? The autumn breeze rustled through the leaves outside Coach Daniels' office as Ethan Carter sat in the familiar leather chair, his fingers nervously tapping against the armrest. 3 weeks had passed since his sessions began, and while progress felt slow, something felt different today. The morning's encounter with Jake Turner still lingered in his mind, creating an unexpected shift in his perspective. Coach Daniels leaned forward, his weathered face carrying the wisdom of countless success stories. Remember what we discussed about breathing from your diaphragm, Ethan? Let's try that passage again. The coach's voice carried the same patient tone that had become a cornerstone of their sessions, but today he noticed a subtle change in his young student's demeanor. Across town, Morgan Freeman sat in Mrs. Carter's diner, quietly observing her, as she served customers with practiced efficiency. Between orders, she kept glancing at the clock, knowing her son was at his therapy session. He's in good hands, Morgan assured her, his distinctive voice carrying across the counter. Sometimes, the biggest breakthroughs come when we least expect them. Back in the therapy room, Ethan took a deep breath, focusing on the techniques Coach Daniels had taught him. The words that had once felt like obstacles now seemed less daunting. The cute, quick brown fox, he began, then stopped, frustration creeping in. But instead of giving up, something Jake had said earlier echoed in his mind. We all fight our own battles. Coach Daniels noticed the shift in Ethan's expression and recognized it from years of experience, the moment when determination overcomes fear. Take your time, Ethan. Remember what Morgan told you about finding your rhythm? The mention of Morgan's name brought a small smile to Ethan's face, remembering their conversations about how even the legendary actor once struggled with his own voice. Without warning, the words began flowing more smoothly than ever before. The quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog. The sentence emerged with only minimal stuttering, each word distinct and clear. Coach Daniels maintained his professional composure, but his eyes betrayed his excitement. This was the moment they had been working toward. The breakthrough triggered a cascade of emotions in Ethan. Years of held-back words seemed to rush forward, seeking expression. He began sharing stories about school, about Jake's surprising confession, about his mother's dedication. all with fewer blocks and stops than ever before. Coach Daniels listened intently, carefully noting how Ethan's confidence grew with each successfully completed thought. Meanwhile, Morgan had stepped away from the diner to make a phone call. "How's he doing today, Coach?" he asked, his deep voice carrying genuine concern. The response brought a knowing smile to his face. He had seen this pattern before, had lived it himself. Sometimes all it took was one moment of clarity to change everything. Mrs. Carter noticed Morgan's expression as he returned to his seat. "Good news?" she asked, trying to read his face. Morgan simply nodded, understanding that some victories needed to be celebrated in their own time. The transformation happening in Coach Daniels' office would reveal itself soon enough. As the session continued, Ethan found himself tackling increasingly challenging passages. Each success, no matter how small, built upon the previous one. Coach Daniels introduced new exercises carefully calibrated to push Ethan's growing confidence without overwhelming it. The boy who had entered the office with hunched shoulders now sat straighter, his voice growing stronger with each attempt. The session's end approached, but neither Ethan nor Coach Daniels felt the usual relief that accompanied it. Instead, there was an electric sense of possibility in the air. "Would you like to try something more challenging?" Coach Daniels asked, pulling out a piece of paper he had been saving for the right moment. The passage was longer, more complex, than anything they had attempted before. Ethan hesitated for a moment, but then remembered Morgan's words about courage not being the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. He nodded, took another deep breath, and began reading. The words weren't perfect. Some stutters remained, some pauses lingered longer than others. But something fundamental had changed. The fear that had once paralyzed him had transformed into determination. As Ethan gathered his things to leave, Coach Daniels made a quick note in his file. This wasn't just a breakthrough in speech, it was a breakthrough in spirit. The question now wasn't if Ethan could overcome his stuttering, but how far his newfound confidence would take him. What other barriers would fall now that this first, crucial wall had been breached? The autumn breeze rustled through the leaves outside Coach Daniels' office as Ethan completed another successful session. His progress over the past few weeks had been remarkable, though not without its challenges. The young boy's determination had impressed both Coach Daniels and Morgan Freeman, who had been quietly monitoring Ethan's development through regular updates. Coach Daniels leaned back in his chair, studying Ethan's face with thoughtful consideration. "You know, Ethan, there's something I've been wanting to discuss with you. Have you heard about the regional youth storytelling competition?" Ethan's eyes widened slightly, his hands instinctively gripping the arms of his chair. The mere thought of public speaking sent a familiar flutter through his stomach, but it wasn't the paralyzing fear he once knew. Something had changed. "The C competition?" Ethan asked, his stutter notably lighter than it had been weeks ago. His voice carried a hint of curiosity beneath the apprehension. Mrs. Carter, who always waited quietly during these sessions, straightened in her chair. She exchanged a meaningful glance with Coach Daniels, remembering their earlier private conversation about pushing Ethan beyond his comfort zone. "Morgan actually mentioned it to me," Coach Daniels continued, pulling out a colorful brochure from his desk drawer. "He thinks you're ready for something like this, and I have to say I agree. The competition isn't about perfect speech, it's about connecting with your audience through storytelling." Across town, Jake Turner sat at his kitchen table, staring at the same brochure. His father's words from that morning still rang in his ears. "Public speaking is essential for success, son. You're entering that competition whether you like it or not." The irony wasn't lost on Jake. How many times had he mocked Ethan for his stutter, while harboring his own fears of public speaking? Morgan Freeman, meanwhile, was making a phone call from his hotel room. "How did he take it, Coach?" His deep, distinctive voice carried genuine concern. The competition had been his idea, a way to help both Ethan and Jake face their fears while potentially bridging the gap between them. "He's processing it," Coach Daniels replied, watching Ethan study the brochure with growing interest. "But I see something in his eyes, the same look you had all those years ago when you faced your own." Speech challenges. The revelation about Morgan's past struggles with public speaking had been a carefully guarded secret, known only to Coach Daniels and a few others. It was this shared experience that had drawn Morgan to Ethan's situation in the first place. Mrs. Carter observed her son's reaction carefully. Gone was the boy who would have immediately rejected such a suggestion just months ago. In his place sat someone different. Someone who was beginning to believe in possibilities rather than limitations. The competition is in 3 weeks, Coach, Daniels explained, his voice gentle but encouraging. Each participant tells a 5-minute story of their choice. It can be personal, fictional, or anything in between. What matters is how you connect with your audience. Ethan's fingers traced the words on the brochure. Could I tell any story I want? His question revealed the first spark of genuine interest. Absolutely. Coach Daniels smiled, recognizing the subtle shift in Ethan's demeanor. In fact, sometimes the stories we find most challenging to tell are the ones that need to be shared the most. What story would you want to tell, Ethan? The question hung in the air, pregnant with possibility. In that moment, something clicked in Ethan's mind, a realization that perhaps his journey, his struggles, and his gradual triumph over fear could be more than just his personal experience. Maybe his story could help others who felt as lost and afraid as he once did. Mrs. Carter watched as her son's expression transformed from uncertainty to contemplation. She thought about all the nights she had spent worrying about his future, all the tears she had wiped away after difficult days at school. Could this competition be more than just another challenge? Could it be an opportunity for Ethan to rewrite his own story? The decision Ethan would make in the next few moments would set in motion a chain of events that would not only challenge him, but would also unexpectedly impact Jake Turner's life. Neither boy knew it yet, but their paths were about to converge in ways that would transform them both. What story would Ethan choose to tell? And how would his decision affect the delicate balance between former bully and victim? The answers to these questions would emerge in the coming weeks, as both boys prepared to face their fears on the same stage, under the watchful eyes of their families, their mentors, and most importantly, themselves. The weight of Coach Daniels' suggestion hung heavy in Ethan Carter's mind as he walked home from their latest session. The annual Riverside Youth Storytelling Competition loomed just 6 weeks away, and while part of him yearned to participate, another part recoiled at the mere thought of standing before hundreds of people. How could someone who struggled to order lunch in the school cafeteria possibly tell a story on stage? Mrs. Carter noticed her son's distraction during dinner, watching as he pushed his meatloaf around the plate without taking a single bite. "Everything okay, sweetheart?" she asked, reaching across the table to touch his hand. Ethan's response came in fragments, his words catching like fabric on thorns as he explained Coach Daniels' proposal. Morgan Freeman's phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Carter later that evening, expressing her concerns about the competition. Having witnessed Ethan's progress over the past months, Morgan understood the delicate balance between pushing too hard and not pushing enough. He recalled his own journey decades ago, when the thought of delivering lines before an audience had seemed as impossible as touching the stars. The next morning, Jake Turner surprised everyone by defending Ethan when another student mocked the idea of him entering the competition. "You don't know what he can do," Jake said firmly, shocking. Even himself with his protective stance, the transformation in Jake had been gradual but profound, his former role as tormentor evolving into something resembling respect, perhaps even friendship. Coach Daniels observed Ethan's internal struggle during their next session, noting how the boy's stuttering intensified whenever the competition came up in conversation. "Did you know?" the coach began, sharing a story about a former student who'd gone from barely speaking to winning national debates, that fear and excitement trigger the same physiological responses in our bodies. This revelation sparked something in Ethan's mind. Could his racing heart and sweaty palms be signs of excitement rather than fear? Morgan arranged to meet Ethan at their usual spot in the park, bringing along a surprise guest, a successful radio host who had overcome a severe stutter in his youth. The host's stories of triumph and perseverance resonated deeply with Ethan, who began to see his own potential reflected in another's success. But would it be enough to convince him to take this monumental step? Mrs. Carter watched from her diner window as Ethan practiced his breathing exercises on the walk to school, her heart swelling with pride at his determination while simultaneously aching with maternal worry. She'd seen the toll that public speaking took on him, yet she'd also witnessed the joy in his eyes when he successfully navigated a difficult conversation. The decision weighed heavily on Ethan as he sat in his room that evening, surrounded by books filled with stories he loved. His fingers traced the spines of his favorites, each one holding adventures he longed to share. A gentle knock at his door revealed Jake, who'd come to return a borrowed comic book. "You know," Jake said, uncharacteristically, hesitant, "my dad always says I can't do anything right, but watching you work so hard, it makes me think maybe we're both stronger than people think." Coach Daniels received an unexpected visit from Morgan, both men discussing Ethan's potential while acknowledging the risks. "Sometimes," Morgan mused, his distinctive voice carrying years of wisdom, "the stories we're most afraid to tell are the ones that need telling the most." The coach nodded, remembering countless students who'd found their voice despite seemingly insurmountable odds. As the deadline for competition registration approached, Ethan found himself at a crossroads. Each encouraging word from his supporters added another brick to the foundation of his confidence, yet doubt continued its persistent whisper. Would he find the courage to step onto that stage? Could the boy who once couldn't say his own name without stuttering dare to share a story with hundreds of strangers? The answer lay not in the certainty of success, but in the understanding that growth often requires stepping into the unknown. For Ethan Carter, the real story wasn't just about whether he would enter the competition. It was about discovering that sometimes the biggest victories come from simply having the courage to try. Jake Turner stood alone in the school hallway, his hand lingering on his locker door as he watched Ethan Carter practicing his lines with Morgan Freeman in the empty classroom across the hall. Something had shifted inside Jake over the past few weeks. A gradual transformation that made his previous actions toward Ethan feel like distant echoes of a person he no longer recognized. The weight of his own father's constant criticism had always pushed Jake to seek control through intimidation, but witnessing Morgan Freeman's patient guidance of Ethan stirred memories of his own struggles. How many times had Jake wished for someone to show him that same understanding when his father berated him for not meeting impossible expectations? During one particularly meaningful afternoon, Jake overheard Morgan sharing personal stories with Ethan about his own journey to overcome speech challenges. The revelation that someone as accomplished as Morgan Freeman had faced similar obstacles created a crack in Jake's carefully constructed facade. The legendary actor's words resonated deeply. "Our greatest weaknesses often become our greatest strengths, but only if we're brave enough to face them." Mrs. Carter's dedication to her son's progress, working double shifts at the diner while supporting Ethan's dreams, reminded Jake of his own mother's quiet strength before she left. The parallel struck him profoundly. How different might his life have been if he'd chosen empathy over anger? The question haunted him, pushing him toward an unexpected decision. Coach Daniels noticed the change in Jake first, catching him lingering after school, watching Ethan's speech sessions from afar. The coach recognized the look of someone wrestling with their conscience, having seen it countless times in his years of helping children overcome their challenges. What would it take for Jake to cross that invisible line between observer and ally? The turning point came during a practice session when Ethan struggled particularly hard with a difficult passage. Jake, who had been quietly observing, found himself stepping forward instead of walking away. "You know, Carter," he said, his voice lacking its usual edge, "that part about perseverance, you're actually living it right now." Morgan Freeman exchanged a knowing look with Coach Daniels as Jake awkwardly offered his first words of encouragement. The simple gesture marked the beginning of an unlikely alliance, one that would prove transformative for both boys. Jake's understanding of strength began to shift from physical dominance to the courage it takes to support others. As days passed, Jake's presence during practice sessions became more frequent and purposeful. He began offering genuine feedback, drawing from his experience in drama club, a passion he'd kept hidden for fear of his father's disapproval. The very qualities Jake had once mocked in Ethan, his determination, his vulnerability, his willingness to try despite the risk of failure, became sources of inspiration. Mrs. Carter watched this transformation with cautious optimism, remembering the countless times she'd comforted Ethan after Jake's previous taunts. Could the same boy who had caused her son so much pain become instrumental in his journey toward confidence? The answer unfolded gradually in small moments. Jake carrying Ethan's books without being asked, defending him against other potential bullies, sharing techniques from his own public speaking experiences. The dynamic between the two boys evolved into something neither could have predicted. Jake's own struggles with his father's expectations created a bridge of understanding, while Ethan's perseverance showed Jake a different kind of courage. Morgan Freeman observed this development with satisfaction, knowing that sometimes the most powerful changes come from the most unexpected sources. Coach Daniels integrated Jake's growing support into their sessions, recognizing that peer encouragement often carried more weight than adult guidance. How would this newfound alliance impact both boys as they faced their individual challenges? Could Jake's transformation from tormentor to supporter help him confront his own fears and insecurities? The answer began to emerge as Jake found himself sharing more about his hidden passion for theater with Ethan and the others. His father's dismissal of performing arts as impractical had driven Jake's interest underground. But watching Ethan face his fears head-on inspired Jake to question his own self-imposed limitations. What other barriers might fall as these two unlikely allies continued to support each other's growth? The autumn breeze carried the sound of determined voices through the community center's open windows, as Ethan Carter worked diligently with Coach Daniels. Their sessions had intensified since Morgan Freeman's surprise announcement of the upcoming regional storytelling contest, now just 3 weeks away. The legendary actor's belief in Ethan had sparked something new in the young boy's spirit. But could belief alone be enough to overcome years of stuttering? Coach Daniels introduced innovative techniques, moving beyond traditional speech exercises to incorporate elements of performance and storytelling. Remember, Ethan, storytelling isn't just about perfect speech. It's about connecting with your audience, he explained, watching as Ethan practiced his breathing exercises. The boy's dedication was evident in the way he approached each challenge, no longer shrinking from difficult words but facing them head-on. Morgan's occasional visits brought an extra dimension to their preparation. He shared insights from his own journey, revealing vulnerabilities that surprised even Coach Daniels. "You know, I wasn't always this confident," Morgan confided during one session, his distinctive voice softening. "The key isn't eliminating fear, it's learning to dance with it." His words resonated deeply with Ethan, who had never considered that someone as accomplished as Morgan Freeman might have faced similar struggles. The most unexpected support came from Jake Turner, who had begun spending his after-school hours at the community center. His presence, once a source of anxiety for Ethan, had transformed into a source of encouragement. Jake's own story of dealing with his father's crushing expectations had created an unlikely bond between the former adversaries. He often served as Ethan's practice audience, offering genuine feedback that helped refine the performance. Mrs. Carter watched this transformation from the sidelines, her heart swelling with pride and gratitude. During her breaks at the diner, she would sometimes catch glimpses of Ethan practicing in the adjacent park, his voice growing stronger with each passing day. The change in her son went beyond speech improvement. There was a new confidence in his walk, a brightness in his eyes that had been missing for so long. The story Ethan chose for the contest held special significance, a tale about finding courage in unexpected places. Coach Daniels helped him craft the narrative, incorporating natural pauses that worked with Ethan's speech patterns rather than against them. "Your unique rhythm adds character to the story," Coach Daniels observed. "It makes people lean in, want to hear more." Morgan's influence extended beyond mere technique. He taught Ethan about the power of silence, the importance of connecting with each word, and how to use his whole body to communicate. These sessions often ran late into the evening, with Mrs. Carter bringing dinner from the diner, creating an informal family atmosphere that nourished both body and spirit. The preparation wasn't without its challenges. There were moments of frustration, when certain words refused to flow, times when Ethan's confidence wavered. During one particularly difficult session, Jake shared something his basketball coach had told him. Progress isn't about perfect days. It's about never having two bad days in a row. This simple wisdom became a mantra for their group. Coach Daniels noticed how the dynamic between all involved had evolved into something special. Morgan's star power could have easily overshadowed the process, but instead, it served as a catalyst for genuine connection. The coach had seen many students over the years, but there was something unique about how this particular group had come together, each person playing a crucial role in Ethan's journey. As the contest drew nearer, the preparation intensified. They organized small practice performances for the community center staff, gradually increasing the audience size to help Ethan adjust to performing under pressure. Each run-through revealed new areas for improvement, but also highlighted how far he had come. The transformation wasn't just in Ethan's speech. It was in the way he carried himself, how he engaged with others, and most importantly, how he viewed his own capabilities. But as the final week of preparation began, questions lingered. Would all this work be enough for the regional competition? Could Ethan maintain his composure in front of a large audience? And perhaps most importantly, would he finally see in himself what others had seen all along? The auditorium buzzed with anticipation as parents, teachers, and students filed into their seats for the annual storytelling contest. Behind the heavy velvet curtains, Ethan Carter's heart thundered against his ribcage, his hands trembling as he clutched his note cards. The backstage area felt smaller than during rehearsals, the walls seemingly closing in as he watched other contestants pacing, practicing their lines in hushed whispers. Morgan Freeman stood beside Ethan, his reassuring presence a steady anchor in the storm of anxiety. Remember what we talked about, son? The butterflies in your stomach? They're not your enemies. They're your fuel. His deep, resonant voice carried the wisdom of countless performances, yet held a gentleness that spoke directly to Ethan's fears. From the corner of his eye, Ethan spotted Jake Turner, who had slipped backstage despite the contestants-only rule. Their eyes met, and to Ethan's surprise, Jake offered a subtle nod, a far cry from the sneers and mockery of months past. The transformation in their relationship still felt surreal, like a dream Ethan might wake from at any moment. Mrs. Carter hovered nearby, her waitress uniform indicating she had rushed straight from her shift at the diner. Her eyes held a mixture of pride and concern as she watched her son prepare for what could be the most significant moment of his young life. Coach Daniels stood beside her, reviewing last-minute notes and occasionally glancing at Ethan with quiet confidence. "What if I freeze up there?" Ethan whispered to Morgan, his stutter more pronounced under stress. The question hung in the air, heavy with the weight of months of preparation and countless hours of practice. The stage lights leaked through the curtain's edges, casting dancing shadows that seemed to mock his uncertainty. Morgan placed a weathered hand on Ethan's shoulder, turning the boy to face him. "Did you know that before my first major role, I was so nervous I nearly walked away?" The revelation caught Ethan off guard. How could someone as legendary as Morgan Freeman ever doubt himself? But here's what I learned. Courage isn't about not being scared. It's about letting that fear push you forward instead of holding you back. Coach Daniels approached, his clipboard tucked under his arm. "Your breathing exercises, Ethan. Remember to ground yourself." The coach demonstrated the technique they'd practiced countless times, and Ethan followed along, feeling his racing heart begin to steady. From the audience side of the curtain came the sound of the principal's voice announcing the start of the competition. Each word seemed to echo in Ethan's ears, making time stretch like taffy. He was scheduled to perform third, not too early to be overwhelming, but not late enough to let anxiety build to unbearable levels. Mrs. Carter stepped forward, straightening Ethan's collar with trembling hands. "You've got this, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice catching slightly. "You're not the same boy who started this journey." Her words carried the weight of every late-night practice session, every tear shed, every small victory along the way. Jake, who had been hanging back, finally approached. "Hey, Carter," he said, his usual bravado notably absent. "Show them what you've got." The simple statement coming from his former tormentor carried more impact than any lengthy speech could have. The first contestant took the stage, their voice drifting back to where Ethan stood. Each word they spoke marked another moment closer to his turn. Morgan noticed Ethan's breathing becoming shallow again and guided him through another calming exercise. "Tell me again," Morgan prompted. "What's the story about?" As Ethan began explaining his piece, a tale of transformation and courage he had crafted with Morgan's guidance, his voice grew stronger. The words flowed more smoothly as he lost himself in the narrative, momentarily forgetting his fears. Coach Daniels nodded approvingly, making a final note on his clipboard. The second performer began their story, and Ethan felt the familiar surge of panic rising. But this time, something was different. The butterflies in his stomach weren't just signs of fear. They were reminders of how far he'd come. Each flutter represented a moment of growth, a challenge overcome, a small victory in his journey. The stage manager appeared, clipboard in hand. 2 minutes, Ethan," she whispered, offering an encouraging smile. The moment of truth was approaching, and everyone who had supported him through this journey stood ready to witness his transformation. Would the months of preparation be enough to overcome years of self-doubt? The auditorium lights dimmed as Ethan Carter stood in the wings, his heart thundering against his ribcage. Behind him, Morgan Freeman's reassuring presence radiated calm, while Coach Daniels offered a subtle thumbs up from the opposite side of the stage. The familiar faces in the audience emerged from the darkness, his mother in the front row, nervously clutching her purse, and Jake Turner, surprisingly present, sitting with an expression of genuine interest rather than his usual smirk. Principal Matthews' voice echoed through the speakers, introducing the evening's final speaker. "And now please welcome Ethan Carter, who will be sharing his thoughts on finding your voice." The irony of the title wasn't lost on anyone who knew Ethan's journey. The first step onto the stage felt like walking through molasses. Ethan's legs moved mechanically, each footfall echoing in his ears. The microphone stood before him like a sentinel, its presence both threatening and inviting. How many times had he practiced this moment with Coach Daniels? How many hours had he spent in Morgan's company, learning to embrace the pauses between words? Good evening," Ethan began, his voice barely a whisper. The microphone caught his uncertainty and amplified it across the room. A few audience members leaned forward, straining to hear. Mrs. Carter's fingers intertwined more tightly in her lap, her expression a mixture of pride and concern. Morgan, watching from the wings, remembered his own first public speaking engagement. Decades ago, the trembling hands, the dry mouth, the overwhelming urge to flee. He had promised Ethan that fear wasn't the enemy, it was the catalyst for courage. Would the young boy remember their conversations as he stood there, facing his greatest challenge? Ethan's fingers gripped the podium, his knuckles white with tension. The index cards before him suddenly seemed foreign, the carefully practiced, words swimming before his eyes. But then something unexpected happened. A memory surfaced of Morgan's voice during their practice sessions. "Don't fight the stutter, son. Dance with it." Taking a deep breath, Ethan lifted his gaze to meet the audience. Jake Turner, who had once mocked his every stumbled word, now sat attentively, perhaps remembering their recent conversation about their shared struggles with expectations. Ethan with his speech, Jake with his demanding father. 3 months ago, Ethan continued, his voice growing stronger. "I couldn't imagine standing here. I couldn't imagine speaking to anyone." The stutter was present, but it no longer controlled him. Coach Daniels had taught him that perfect fluency wasn't the goal. Authentic expression was. The audience leaned in, drawn not by the mechanics of his speech, but by the raw honesty in his voice. Mrs. Carter's hands relaxed slightly as she watched. Her son, remembering the countless nights of worry, the tearful conversations and the unexpected blessing of Morgan Freeman walking into their lives at the local diner. Each word built upon the last, creating a rhythm that was uniquely Ethan's. He wasn't trying to speak like Morgan Freeman or Coach Daniels or anyone else. He was finding his own voice, complete with its distinctive characteristics. The story he shared wasn't just about stuttering. It was about transformation, friendship, and the unexpected allies one finds along the way. As Ethan reached the heart of his speech, something shifted in the auditorium. The initial tension dissolved into engaged silence. Even the usual shuffling and coughing had ceased, replaced by rapt attention. What would this young boy who had once been afraid to order his own lunch reveal about the nature of courage? The stage lights felt less harsh now, more like the warm encouragement of his mentors. Morgan watched from the shadows, recognizing the subtle changes in Ethan's posture. The squared shoulders, the lifted chin, the growing confidence that came not from conquering fear, but from embracing it as part of the journey. But would this newfound confidence hold as Ethan approached the most challenging part of his speech? The personal anecdotes that had brought tears to Mrs. Carter's eyes during rehearsal? The moment of truth was approaching, and everyone in the auditorium, from Jake Turner to Coach Daniels, held their breath, waiting to see if the butterfly would fully emerge from its chrysalis. As Ethan's initial words echoed through the auditorium, something remarkable began to unfold. The tremor in his voice, which had always been his greatest source of shame, transformed into a powerful tool that drew the audience closer, making them lean forward in their seats. His story about meeting Morgan Freeman and learning to embrace his stutter wasn't just a speech, it was a testament to his journey. From the back of the auditorium, Morgan watched with pride as Ethan's shoulders straightened with each passing minute. The young boy's words, though occasionally punctuated by stutters, carried a weight that silenced even the most restless students. Jake Turner, sitting in the third row, found himself nodding along, his earlier skepticism melting away as he recognized pieces of his own struggle in Ethan's narrative. Mrs. Carter, clutching Coach Daniels' hand in the audience, felt tears welling up as her son described the countless nights he'd spent practicing in front of his bedroom mirror. The memory of finding him asleep with speech exercise cards scattered across his bed took on new meaning as she watched him command the stage with growing confidence. Coach Daniels observed with professional pride how Ethan implemented the techniques they'd practiced together. The deliberate pauses, the careful breath control, the subtle hand movements all coming together in a natural rhythm that enhanced rather than hindered his delivery. What had once been mechanical exercises now flowed with authentic emotion. The story reached its crescendo as Ethan shared the moment Morgan had revealed his own past struggles with public speaking. The revelation that even legendary actors faced similar challenges resonated throughout the auditorium. Students who had once mocked Ethan's stutter now sat in contemplative silence, perhaps recognizing their own vulnerabilities in his words. Jake's presence in the story took an unexpected turn as Ethan described their transformation from adversaries to allies. Rather than painting Jake as a villain, Ethan spoke about understanding and growth, catching Jake off guard with his generosity of spirit. The former bully found himself swallowing hard against an unexpected lump in his throat. Morgan's influence wove through every aspect of Ethan's speech, but it was the boy's own voice that truly shone. The wisdom gained from their conversations had merely been the foundation upon which Ethan had built his own narrative. His stutter, rather than disappearing completely, became part of his authentic voice, a reminder that imperfections could coexist with strength. As Ethan approached the conclusion of his speech, the atmosphere in the auditorium had shifted dramatically. The initial pity some had felt at seeing him take the stage had transformed into genuine admiration. Coach Daniels noticed several students wiping their eyes, moved by the raw honesty of Ethan's journey. Mrs. Carter watched in amazement as her son, who once couldn't order his own meal at restaurants, stood tall before hundreds of his peers. The transformation wasn't just in his speech, it was in the way he carried himself, the confidence that radiated from within. She caught Morgan's eye across the auditorium, sharing a moment of quiet gratitude. The impact of Ethan's words extended beyond his personal story. Students who had remained silent about their own struggles began to see possibilities they hadn't considered before. Jake, in particular, felt the weight of his father's criticism lessening as he absorbed the message about accepting oneself despite perceived flaws. Coach Daniels recognized that this moment marked not just the culmination of their work together, but the beginning of something larger. Ethan's courage in sharing his story would ripple through the school community, challenging preconceptions about weakness and strength. The speech was becoming more than a competition entry. It was becoming a catalyst for change. Morgan observed with satisfaction how the audience had become completely engrossed in Ethan's narrative. The boy who had once hidden behind his mother's legs at the diner was now holding hundreds of people spellbound with his words. The actor's own journey with public speaking had come full circle through his mentorship of Ethan, proving that sometimes the greatest roles we play are the ones that help others find their voice. Standing before the packed auditorium, Ethan Carter felt his heart thundering against his ribcage as hundreds of eyes focused on him. The spotlight's warmth reminded him of all those private sessions with Coach Daniels, practicing in the empty classroom after school. Yet this moment carried a different weight, the culmination of months of dedication, tears, and triumph. From his front row seat, Morgan Freeman leaned forward slightly, his presence a silent anchor of support. Their journey together had started with a chance encounter at his mother's diner, but it had evolved into something far more meaningful. Morgan's own struggles with finding his voice in his early acting career had created a bridge between them, turning their unlikely friendship into a powerful force for change. Mrs. Carter clutched her hands together, watching her son with a mixture of pride and nervous energy. How different things were from those tearful nights when Ethan would come home, defeated by Jake Turner's cruel mimicry. The memory of those days made the present moment even more poignant, especially with Jake now sitting just 2 rows behind her, his usual smirk replaced by genuine attention. Coach Daniels stood at the back of the auditorium, arms crossed, a knowing smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The techniques they'd practiced countless times were about to be put to the ultimate test. The breathing exercises, the visualization methods, the confidence-building exercises. Would they hold up under the pressure of this moment? Ethan's fingers gripped the podium as he began the most challenging part of his speech. The words that had once been his greatest enemies now waited, to be transformed into allies. He remembered Morgan's advice about finding strength in vulnerability, about how every pause could be turned into a moment of power rather than weakness. Jake Turner shifted in his seat, unconsciously holding his breath. The transformation in his relationship with Ethan had been unexpected, sparked by a powerful confrontation where Morgan had helped him understand the weight of his actions. His father's criticism had shaped his behavior, but watching Ethan's determination had taught him about real strength. The audience leaned forward as Ethan launched into the heart of his speech. His voice, once trapped behind a wall of fear, now carried across the auditorium with growing confidence. The occasional stutter appeared, but instead of derailing him, it became part of his rhythm, a reminder of his journey rather than a barrier to his success. Morgan's eyes glistened with pride as he watched his young protege navigate through the challenging passages. Their weekly conversations in the park, sharing stories and strategies, had built more than just speaking skills. They had forged an unshakable belief in possibility. The legendary actor recognized in Ethan the same fire he had discovered in himself decades ago. Mrs. Carter's hand found its way to her heart as Ethan reached the climax of his speech. The son who had once whispered his dreams now commanded attention, with every word. Coach Daniels' expertise had provided the technical foundation, but it was the unexpected alliance between Morgan and Ethan that had truly catalyzed this transformation. The speech's most demanding section approached, a passage that had consistently challenged Ethan during practice. Coach Daniels straightened up, his professional expertise allowing him to anticipate the upcoming hurdle. Would Ethan remember to implement their strategies? Would the techniques hold up under the intense pressure of the moment? The answer began to unfold as Ethan's voice grew stronger with each sentence. The stutters that appeared became brief pauses that added emphasis rather than interruption. The audience, initially sympathetic, now hung on every word, drawn in by the power of his message rather than the mechanics of his delivery. Jake found himself nodding along, remembering the private conversation with Morgan that had opened his eyes to the impact of his actions. His own struggle with his father's expectations had created a bully, but witnessing Ethan's journey had shown him a different path. The respect he now felt for his former victim had replaced the need to tear others down to feel strong. As Ethan approached the final moments of his speech, the transformation was complete. The nervous 12-year-old who had once hidden from public speaking had evolved into a commanding presence. Morgan's mentorship, Coach Daniel's expertise, and the unexpected support from a former bully had combined to create something remarkable. The journey that had begun with tears and frustration was culminating in a moment of triumph. But would Ethan's newfound confidence withstand the final test? Could he deliver the closing lines with the same strength he had shown throughout? The answer waited in the next breath, the next word, the next moment of truth. The auditorium buzzed, with thunderous applause as Ethan Carter stood at the podium, his heart racing not from fear but from pure exhilaration. The standing ovation before him blurred through tears of joy, yet one figure remained crystal clear: Morgan Freeman, beaming with pride from the front row, his weathered hands coming together in steady, deliberate claps that seemed to echo above all others. Mrs. Carter couldn't contain her emotions as she watched her son transform before her eyes. Gone was the hesitant boy who once struggled to order at restaurants. In his place stood a confident young man who had just delivered a speech that left the entire school speechless. Her gaze shifted between Ethan and Morgan, the unlikely mentor, who had changed their lives in ways she never imagined possible. From his seat near the middle of the auditorium, Jake Turner found himself standing and clapping with genuine admiration. Who would have thought that the kid he once mocked would become someone he now respected? The memory of his own harsh words tasted bitter in his mouth, but something else was rising in its place. A strange mix of pride and regret that made him question everything he thought he knew about strength. Coach Daniels observed from the wings, his professional demeanor barely containing his excitement. How many students had he guided through their speech difficulties over the years? Yet there was something special about Ethan's journey that touched him deeply. Perhaps it was the way Morgan Freeman had orchestrated this whole transformation, bringing together unlikely allies in support of one determined young boy. As the applause finally began to fade, Morgan made his way to the stage, each step measured and purposeful. The audience hushed in anticipation. What words of wisdom would the legendary actor share? But instead of addressing the crowd, Morgan simply placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder and smiled, a gesture more powerful than any speech could have been. Aftermath of Ethan's triumph rippled through the school community like waves in a pond. Teachers who had once given him pitying looks now sought his input in class discussions. Students who had previously avoided eye contact began greeting him in the hallways. But perhaps the most remarkable change was in Jake Turner, who approached Ethan during lunch the following day. The cafeteria fell silent as Jake made his way to Ethan's table, his usual swagger replaced by an unfamiliar humility. What would happen next? Would old patterns reassert themselves? But Jake surprised everyone by asking if he could join Ethan, genuinely interested in learning more about the techniques that had helped him overcome his stutter. Mrs. Carter noticed these changes in her daily life as well. Her son's newfound confidence showed in small ways, ordering his own meals at the diner where she worked, initiating conversations with strangers, even helping younger students who struggled with their own speech challenges. How had Morgan known exactly what Ethan needed to break free from his shell? Coach Daniels found himself fielding calls from other schools and parents, all eager to learn about the program that had helped Ethan Carter. But he knew that success wasn't just about techniques and exercises. It was about building a support system, creating an environment where growth could flourish. Morgan had understood this from the beginning, hadn't he? Morgan himself began making regular visits to the school, not just for Ethan but for any student who needed guidance. His presence became a symbol of possibility, a reminder that everyone's story deserved to be heard. The actor shared his own struggles with confidence, revealing vulnerabilities that made him more than just a celebrity. He became a bridge between what was and what could be, The transformation extended beyond individuals to the entire school culture. Bullying incidents decreased as students began to understand the power of words, both to harm and to heal. Teachers reported increased participation from previously quiet students. Even the principal noticed a shift in the school's atmosphere, as if Ethan's courage had given others permission to face their own fears. Jake's father, known for his harsh criticism, attended one of Morgan's mentoring sessions and left with tears in his eyes, finally understanding the impact his words had on his son. Could this be the beginning of healing for their relationship as well? The ripples continued to spread, touching lives in unexpected ways and proving that sometimes the greatest changes start with a single act of courage. As spring turned to summer, Ethan's story became part of the school's legacy, not just as a tale of overcoming stuttering, but as a testament to the power of mentorship, friendship, and self-belief. Morgan Freeman's unexpected role in their community had catalyzed changes that would continue long after the final bell of the school year. What began as one boy's struggle to find his voice had become a chorus of transformation, proving that sometimes the most powerful endings are actually new beginnings. And somewhere in the wings, Morgan Freeman watched it all unfold, knowing that sometimes the greatest role we can play is simply being there for someone else's story. The autumn breeze carried the scent of fallen leaves as Morgan Freeman stood beside the old oak tree, where he had first encountered Ethan Carter 6 months ago. Who could have predicted that a chance meeting between a stuttering 12-year-old and a legendary actor would lead to such profound changes in both their lives? Watching Ethan approach from across the schoolyard, Morgan noticed the remarkable transformation in the boy's demeanor. Gone was the hunched posture and downcast eyes. Instead, Ethan walked with measured confidence, his backpack slung casually over one shoulder. The sight stirred memories of Morgan's own journey decades ago, when he too had struggled to find his voice. "Mr. Freeman," Ethan called out, his speech flowing more naturally now. The occasional stutter remained, but it no longer defined him. "I didn't expect to see you here today," Morgan's deep, resonant voice carried across the yard. "Sometimes the best moments in life are the unexpected ones, wouldn't you agree?" He gestured to the bench beneath the oak tree, and they sat together, in comfortable silence. From their vantage point, they could see Jake Turner playing basketball with his friends. The former bully caught sight of them and offered a genuine wave. The transformation in Jake had been equally remarkable, his understanding of his own father's criticism leading to a newfound empathy for others. How many bullies, Morgan wondered, were simply wounded souls seeking recognition? Mrs. Carter emerged from her car across the street, having just finished her shift at the diner. The worry lines that had once creased her forehead had softened, replaced by the quiet pride of a mother watching her child bloom. She waited patiently, understanding the importance of this moment between mentor and mentee. "Coach Daniels T told me something interesting yesterday," Ethan said, breaking the contemplative silence. "He said that sometimes our greatest challenges become our greatest gifts." I didn't understand what he meant at first. Morgan nodded thoughtfully. "And now?" "Now I think I do. If I hadn't stuttered, I wouldn't have met you. Jake would still be a B bully. Mom would still be working double shifts trying to pay for speech therapy." Ethan paused, collecting his thoughts. Everything would be different. The wisdom in the young boy's words struck a chord with Morgan. How many times had his own struggles with speech led him down unexpected paths? What might have been different if he had never faced those challenges? Coach Daniels appeared in the distance, carrying his familiar leather briefcase. His dedication to Ethan's progress had gone far beyond professional obligation, creating a lasting impact that would ripple through the young boy's life for years to come. The coach caught Morgan's eye and gave a subtle nod of acknowledgement, their shared mission having come full circle. "You know, Ethan," Morgan began, his voice carrying the weight of experience, "there's something powerful about returning to where it all began. It helps us see how far we've come, but more importantly, it reminds us of who we really are." A group of younger students passed by, their excited chatter filling the air. One of them pointed at Ethan and whispered, "That's the kid who gave that amazing speech at assembly." The admiration in their voices represented everything Ethan had achieved, yet the young boy remained humble. "Mr. Freeman," Ethan said, his voice steady, "do you think we'll stay in touch?" The question hung in the air, carrying the weight of all they had shared. Morgan understood the deeper meaning behind those words, the fear of losing this connection, the uncertainty of what lay ahead. But hadn't their entire journey been about facing such fears? Mrs. Carter began walking toward them, her waitress uniform still on, but her stride confident and proud. She had witnessed her son's transformation from a front row seat, her own strength growing alongside his. The sight reminded Morgan of how change rarely happens in isolation. It ripples outward, touching everyone in its path. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the schoolyard, Morgan realized that this moment marked not an ending, but a transition. The story of the stuttering boy and the actor who helped him find his voice would continue, evolving in ways neither could predict. But wasn't that the beauty of life's most meaningful connections? What started as a chance encounter had blossomed into something far more significant than either could have imagined. And as they sat there, beneath the oak tree where it all began, both Morgan Freeman and Ethan Carter understood that some bonds transcend time and circumstance, becoming part of who we are and who we might become. The ripples of change that Morgan Freeman set in motion continued to transform lives long after his departure from the small town. His brief presence had created an indelible mark, particularly in the way the community viewed and supported those who struggled with speech impediments. Ethan Carter's transformation became a beacon of hope for others. The once shy boy who could barely string together a sentence now stood confidently before his classmates, delivering presentations with only occasional pauses. His journey inspired 3 other students with similar challenges to seek help from Coach Daniels, who had decided to establish a permanent practice in town rather than return to his previous position in the city. The local diner where Mrs. Carter worked became an unofficial hub for parents seeking guidance about their children's speech difficulties. During her shifts, she would share Ethan's story with concerned mothers and fathers, offering them hope and Coach Daniels' contact information. The simple act of speaking about these challenges openly helped dissolve the stigma that had once surrounded them. Jake Turner's evolution proved equally remarkable. His experience with Ethan had awakened something profound within him, leading him to establish a peer support group at school. The initiative, which he named Speak Up, created a safe space for students to practice public speaking without fear of judgment. His father, witnessing this transformation, began to see his son through different eyes, gradually replacing his harsh criticism with genuine pride. The school administration, moved by these developments, implemented a new anti-bullying program that emphasized empathy and understanding. They invited Coach Daniels to conduct monthly workshops, not just for students with speech difficulties, but for the entire student body. These sessions often featured video messages from Morgan Freeman, who remained connected to the community through his friendship with Ethan. Local businesses started participating in what became known as the Freeman Initiative, offering part-time jobs to students who showed improvement in their communication skills. The program provided practical experience and built confidence in real-world situations. Mrs. Carter's diner led by example, hiring 2 students with speech challenges as weekend hosts. The town's annual talent show transformed into a celebration of progress rather than perfection. Inspired by Ethan's journey, participants shared not only their talents but also their personal growth stories. The event became so popular that neighboring communities began sending their students to participate, creating a network of support that extended beyond town borders. Morgan's influence extended to unexpected places. The local library established a special section dedicated to communication skills and personal development, funded partly by an anonymous donation that many suspected came from the actor himself. The collection included resources for parents, teachers, and students, becoming a valuable community asset. Coach Daniels observed that his students' progress accelerated when they worked together, supporting each other through challenges. He incorporated group sessions into his practice, where students like Ethan shared their experiences and strategies with newcomers. These meetings often ended with participants reading passages from Morgan's films, practicing the measured, confident delivery that had become the actor's trademark. The town's transformation caught the attention of regional media, leading to feature stories about the community's innovative approach to supporting those with speech difficulties. These reports highlighted how one person's kindness could catalyze lasting change, inspiring other communities to develop similar programs. Mrs. Carter noticed subtle but significant changes in her daily interactions at the diner. Customers who once grew impatient with Ethan's stutter now showed genuine interest in his progress, often engaging him in conversation and celebrating his improvements. The diner's walls featured photos of Morgan's visit, serving as a reminder of the day that sparked this community-wide transformation. Jake's relationship with Ethan evolved into a genuine friendship, demonstrating that the most unlikely bonds often prove the strongest. Together, they mentored younger students, sharing their story as an example of how adversity could lead to growth and understanding. Their partnership became a living testament to the power of redemption and the importance of seeing beyond initial judgments. The legacy of Morgan Freeman's intervention extended far beyond helping one boy overcome his stutter. It had awakened a community to its potential for compassion and support, creating a model for how small towns could address challenges through unity and understanding. The question remained, how many other communities could undergo similar transformations if they embraced the same principles of empathy and active support? Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.